Welcome back. And if you're new to my channel, it's nice to meet you. My name is Suzanne. I am a certified astrologer specializing in evolutionary astrology, horary astrology, and a modality called human design. If you want to find out more about my work, you can visit me at gohigherfrequency.com. Today, I'm going to be reviewing the upcoming new moon in Taurus happening on Sunday, right after Pope Francis's funeral. This new moon asks us what values are worth standing up for as we end this karmic cycle and enter a new one. As many of you are aware, we've been riding a train seemed destined to careen off its tracks since November, symbolic of an out-of-bounds Mars and the 6 new moons we've had since, at the Jupiterian 9th degree. And now we're having a moment of sobering up, perhaps with the realization that we can't ignore the fact that we are part of a larger ecosystem, where when you tweak one area, you affect another. It's a ripple effect, both outward and inward, which can work its way back to us in unexpected ways. The Saturnian laws of cause and effect. As a society, we have been given the opportunity to integrate a larger truth, that there are negative consequences with our current imbalances. In our singular reliance on larger agencies where profits are worshipped as the highest ideal and often at the expense of our well-being as part of this larger ecosystem, we have become too dependent on these larger institutions, and it has directly impacted our relationship to the natural world, which has in turn become imbalanced. Science has been chasing its tail to mitigate all of the symptoms of our imbalance, but it's not addressing the root causes. And because profit has seeped its tentacles into every aspect of our lives, it comes at the expense of both the scientific and the spiritual. Everything steeps in money as the primary motivating factor, and it's threatening to take away the very empathy that makes us human. This new moon is the first new moon that indicates a shift of focus. Since November, each new moon has been between the 9th and 10th degree, so very demonstrative of the bridge between Jupiter and Saturn, and the tension we've been feeling with the Jupiter-Saturn squares. The first 2 we experienced last year, and the final square coming up in June, just a day after Trump's birthday. It's the tension between our need for unbounded growth and optimism for the future versus our need for longer-term structure and stability. It's not enough to dream big dreams about what could be. At some point, you are confronted with the constraints of what is pragmatically possible in the present moment and in partnership with the other. It's no wonder that after the full moon in Libra, activating the current constitutional crisis and our relationship with other countries, the death of a prominent spiritual leader, as Saturn just conjuncts the North Node in Pisces with an elevated Venus in Orb, and after the final Mars-Pluto opposition on the day of his funeral in Leo and Aquarius, that we may now get some needed respite from the current madness. During this moon, we shift our focus from growth exploration to transforming the security, stability, and long-term reliability of our current and future partnerships. This new moon is between the 7th and 8th degree of Taurus, so there is a flavor of both Libra and Scorpio in this new moon. We can be creatively optimistic this month in our attempts to align ourselves with the transformative nature of the future. We are now at a crossroads where our initiations during the first part of the year now must be concretized. There's a unique opportunity during this new moon to connect with all the different ways we manipulate situations to favor ourselves, and how we often do to others what we don't want done to ourselves. It's a time to flip the switch and see how this operates within each of us. Seeing it releases its power, It can also help bring compassion and clarity to our seeing. Raven Caldera calls this Taurus new moon the Dryad moon, where we struggle with our relationship to the natural world. She says, this is not an easy moon to be born under, at least in our modern times. If there is not enough nature in the life of those born under the Dryad's moon, something in their emotional nature withers and sets up a great yearning, which they may try to fill with other Taurus coping mechanisms of food, sex, and apathy. The only cure is spending significant periods of time interacting with the natural world, ideally in an untamed state. This new moon also reminds me of a quote from Wendell Berry, who was a farmer, activist, and poet. He says, "The idea was that when faced with abundance, one should consume abundantly, an idea that has survived to become the basis of our present economy. It is neither natural nor civilized, and even from a practical point of view, it is to the last degree brutalizing and stupid." Interestingly, Wendell had his natal Uranus at the beginning of Taurus, and so does Pope Francis. His natal Uranus fell only 2 degrees away from this new moon. Pope Francis, who died minutes away from the Saturn North Node conjunction, made his final Easter appearance merely hours before. A few quotes from his Easter message. "On this day, I would like all of us to hope anew and to revive our trust in others, including those who are different than ourselves, or who come from distant lands, bringing unfamiliar customs, ways of life, and ideas. For all of us are children of God." He also said, "There can be no peace without freedom of religion, freedom of thought, freedom of expression, and respect for the views of others." What an American ideal, right? So I want to look at the charts that lead up to this new moon, starting with the Saturn and North Node chart that happened the day of Pope Francis's death. Looking at this chart with fresh eyes, I was focused on Trump's midheaven coming to the ascendant in my previous video, but Vance has similar angles as Trump, so it was also his midheaven coming to the ascendant. And it was Vance who visited Pope Francis the day before he died. And it was Pope Francis's part of fortune, or his sun moon midpoint, that was at the exact degree of this ascendant. That's how the universe keeps us on our toes. When we think we have everything figured out, it can throw us a curveball. It does make sense that we would see a Pisces karmic cycle ending at this very moment, featuring a prominent spiritual leader who is in direct opposition to how we are treating immigrants today. He was uniquely connected to the idea of socialism and the plight of immigrants. Pope Francis also had a Moon-Venus conjunction in early Aquarius, and Vance has his sun in early degrees of Leo, opposing each other. And both are squaring the upcoming new moon. It's the collective versus the individual theme of the Aquarius-Leo archetype. And we'll continue to see these themes featured even after this final confrontation between Mars and Pluto. So now let's talk about the final Mars and Pluto opposition, which is happening the day before this new moon. The new moon is a release point to the tensions that are building up toward this opposition, which actually begins tomorrow on Wednesday. This happens to be the starting of the procession of Pope Francis when they prepare his body for the funeral that it's actually taking place on Saturday during this opposition. So we're experiencing a tense configuration in the sky that includes Black Moon Lilith in Scorpio. You see that here in the 12th house of this chart. The sun, which is at the degree of this new moon upcoming, and the Mars and Pluto opposition. Now, I'm hoping that this tension just describes the tension that's already present and already known between what Pope Francis represents and his opposition to this administration's actions toward the most vulnerable among us, the immigrants. And I was drawn to this New Yorker headline that described this moment as historic. It's characterized by autocrats and would-be autocrats. Francis was the antithesis of a strong man. So as you can see in this chart, when we looked at the Saturn North Node chart, the ascendant-descendant is now flipped, with Taurus on the descendant. And Trump already said that he was going to attend this funeral with Melania. So he'll be in Rome during this time. So it makes sense that the ascendant-descendant are flipped, and we're now focused on this funeral as a country because our leader will be there. And there will be a lot of other world leaders, including Zelensky, that will attend this funeral. And so we'll probably experiencing a lot of stories that come out that are representative of the tension that we're now experiencing between our countries and our administration's actions on immigrants that are also playing out as a tension within our country between the Supreme Court and the Trump administration. Now, as you can see in this chart, the Mars and Pluto opposition is intercepted in the 3rd and 9th houses, where the Saturn and the Moon rule. So Saturn is symbolic of the spiritual leaders like the Pope and laws and taxes, including tariffs. And the Moon is symbolic of the people, as well as money and our everyday security. Now, the Moon is in Aries, and it's conjunct Chiron in the 5th house. Now, remember, Chiron was conjunct the Sun during the Libra full moon, which was near the time that Trump first announced his reciprocal tariff plan. Now, the 5th and 11th house axis has been featured in a lot of the charts that I've been viewing this year, and it can illustrate our dreams and wishes. And the 5th house specifically can represent speculative industries where we gamble to see a wish come true. It can represent things like the stock market and things like the currencies that we're developing, and we're speculating where things will go. We're making bets. And so we're seeing some of our dreams and wishes come to an end at this moment based on the pragmatic realities of what we can actually accomplish. And Saturn, Venus, and the North Node are now in the 4th house. And this opposition is reflecting the tensions of the themes that the Saturn North Node that I was just talking about in my previous video, the tensions between the spiritual and the material, right versus wrong, man-made laws versus spiritual laws. In this case, this administration seems to be moving further away from the spiritual laws that Pope Francis represented. It also speaks to the recent turmoil in the stock market brought on by the tariffs that this administration rolled out, and also the recent attacks on the judiciary and the universities in the US. It can also include the mass shooting that we just experienced at Florida State University, as we learned that this young boy had some of the extreme views about immigrants and people that were different than him. So it's playing out in all aspects of our society right now, this tension and the ramifications of some of these extreme views that we're holding as a society. Now, since I'm recording this on Tuesday, there can be more violent events that happen in this buildup to this final opposition. But I'm hoping that the themes that are playing out right now are just the tensions that are building up and reflected in this moment. and it'll take the steam out of any future surprise events that we might see in our country. You can see that the sun is on the same degree as the new moon, and it's in the 6th house, which seems to reflect that we're needing to come into some kind of alignment after this opposition. The new moon is bringing us to a crossroads where we need to find alignment so we can work together to move forward as a country. So finally, we get to the new moon chart, which is happening on Sunday, April 27th, the day after Pope Francis's funeral. And you can see the tense T-squared that is built up more clearly in this chart, with the new moon happening in the 8th house, opposing Black Moon Lilith in Scorpio in the 2nd house, and creating a tense T-square with this Mars-Pluto opposition, which is now separating in the 11th and 5th house axis. And we are seeing the spiritual narrative continue in this chart. Venus rules this new moon. It's in Pisces in the 7th house. And the Sabian symbol is about seeing God in everything, even in people who don't think or look like us. So it's very present in this chart, and the tensions that have built up are very present. You can see Pope Francis in this chart. He has his Saturn at 16 degrees of Pisces, very near the descendant of this chart. And he also has his Neptune at 18 degrees Virgo. He had this Neptune-Saturn opposition, which is showing up in the angles of this chart. And his sun, North Node, is in the 4th house of this chart. He was born on an eclipse. He had Chiron on his South Node. It's very near the Jupiter of this chart, which also happens to be Trump's North Node and sun. So Pope Francis and Trump had opposing nodes and suns. They were moving in opposite directions. But Trump has an opportunity to take the spiritual lessons that Pope Francis has been trying to communicate and integrate it into his approach for the United States. The Sibley ascendant is actually very near the IC of this chart. So our own United States chart is very symbolic of Pope Francis's directional approach. And it's very interesting to think about that in light of this new direction that Trump is trying to take us. So we're really at a crossroads where we could wake up and use this as an opportunity to make adjustments to this current antagonizing approach that frankly does not seem to be working. And Trump has this opportunity to adjust that approach. He doesn't have to use this autocratic approach that he's using right in this moment. He has the opportunity to take a different direction. The new moon aligns with fixed stars that speak to conflict and abuse of power, but with an opportunity to overcome these conflicts to produce abundance and happy endings. You know, sometimes we need these larger events to initiate a shock, to wake us all up. The actors on the world stage are just initiating something we need to face as a society. A time when we are experiencing an acute illness where only fever will break the current pattern. Sometimes we must hit rock bottom like a drunk before we can admit we have a problem. Is this the turning point that will change the trajectory we are on? I certainly hope so. For our country's sake, I hope that Trump has an awakening during this time. In these times, it takes courage for us all to stand up for our values. So do you need to rethink what those values are? And then ask yourself what values are worth standing up for in your own life? What we think doesn't involve us can quickly turn on us when we don't pay close attention to what values we hold dear and who and what are mirrors reflecting back at us. This is a really great time for us all to take a new approach to move more sustainably toward our future with a better sense of what our values are and how we can center ourselves in those values and stop trying to reach for something that is not sustainable and not healthy. My hope is that we all have an awakening during this moment in time. What is your hope?